Cassie Hale arrived at the Crescent Motel 15 minutes before her shift started, clutching a warm cup of gas station coffee like it was the only comforting thing left in the world. The motel sat half buried in a thick, wet fog, its neon sign flickering the words Cress, MTL, as if it was struggling to remember its own name. The parking lot was almost entirely empty, except for an old pickup truck with no license plate, and a single, lonely motorcycle leaned against the wall. Cassie shivered. Night shifts always made her uneasy, but this place, something felt deeply wrong before she even walked through the door. Inside, the front lobby smelled faintly of bleach, and something sour underneath it, all like a wet carpet that never truly dried. A shaky ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, clicking with each rotation like a heartbeat that was slightly unnervingly out of rhythm. First shift, a voice made her jump. She turned to see a gaunt man with sunken, tired eyes leaning against the counter. He wore a simple name tag that just read Jonah. "Yeah," Cassie said, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm Cassie. I start tonight." Jonah nodded, but he didn't smile. "You're replacing Marcy. She quit last week." "Why'd she quit?" Cassie asked, her curiosity piqued. Jonah hesitated. His eyes flicked for just a moment toward the long, dim hallway to the left, the hallway where the guest rooms were. "Couldn't handle the hours," he replied finally. Cassie didn't believe him for a second. He said it too quickly, too rehearsed, like he had practiced the line 100 times before. Jonah slid a small, worn binder toward her across the counter. "This has the check-in procedures. You won't get many guests at this hour. Mostly just truckers passing through." Cassie opened the binder and tried to act like she wasn't bothered by the way Jonah kept glancing down that dark hallway. "Anything else I should know? Emergencies? Cleaning schedule?" Jonah scratched the side of his neck. "Yeah, 2 things." He held up 2 fingers, his hand thin and pale in the dim light. "1. Don't go outside after midnight. There's a lot of wildlife around here, and the parking lot lights don't always work." Cassie nodded, seemed reasonable enough. "And 2. Jonah lowered his voice, his hand dropping along with his expression. "Don't open room 23. Ever." Cassie blinked. "Okay, why?" Again, his eyes flicked down the hallway just for a split second, but it was long enough to make a cold chill crawl up her spine. "It's sealed," he said. "Has been for years. The manager will explain more if he ever feels like it." He leaned in closer then, his breath feeling cold on her skin. "Just promise me you won't unlock it, no matter what you hear." "What I hear?" Cassie repeated softly, the question hanging in the air. Jonah straightened abruptly, as if he'd said too much. "My shift's over." He grabbed his jacket from a hook behind the counter and practically bolted for the door. "Good luck, Cassie." He didn't look back. The hours passed with an agonizing slowness. Cassie sat behind the front desk, scrolling through the old, dusty binder while the motel groaned and settled around her. The wind rattled the front doors. The ancient ice machine in the corner clicked on and off randomly, and the hallway lights buzzed with a dull, persistent, annoying hum that was starting to grate on her nerves. Around 1:45 in the morning, her eyes caught something odd on the security camera feed. Most of the screens were fuzzy and distorted, but the one showing the hallway seemed clearer than the others. Disturbingly clear. It was empty, except for room 23. The door looked different from all the others. It was older, the paint was peeling, and the number 23 was slightly crooked. A long dark crack ran down the center of the wood, like someone had kicked it with tremendous force years ago. She leaned closer to the monitor, squinting. For a moment, she thought she saw the doorknob turn, slowly, But when she blinked, it was still. Cassie shook her head. "I'm just tired," she mumbled to herself. She stood up to stretch her legs. The hallway was quiet, far too quiet, like the air itself was holding still, waiting. The clock on the wall ticked toward to 13 a.m., and that was when she heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like a single foot sliding across old worn-out carpet. It was coming from the hallway. Cassie frowned and stepped out from behind the desk. "Hello," she called softly. Maybe it was a guest who was lost, or drunk, or both. But when she looked down the long, empty hallway, no one was there. The lights flickered once, then again, and then Cassie, a whisper, so faint she could have imagined it. But it was so close, it felt like someone was standing right beside her ear. Her breath hitched in her throat. "Jonah," she called out, even though she knew it wasn't him. Silence. Complete and total silence. Then the whisper came again, longer this time, dragging out the sound, pulling at it. "Kakasi." Every single hair on her body stood on end. Cassie instinctively stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The whisper was coming from the direction of room 23. From the cracked door. The sealed room. The one door Jonah had warned her about. Her eyes stayed locked on it, even though it was too far away to see clearly from where she stood. But she felt it. Something was behind that door. Something was awake, and something was waiting. Cassie retreated behind the relative safety of the counter and forced herself to breathe evenly. It had to be the wind, or the old ventilation system, or just her exhausted imagination running wild. But the whisper had sounded too real, too human. She glanced at the hallway monitor again. The camera feed glitched, and for just half a second, she thought she saw a shadow standing in front of room 23. A tall, thin figure that hadn't been there a moment before. A figure that vanished as quickly as it appeared when the screen flickered back to its normal, empty view. Cassie's hands were trembling now. Her shift had only just begun. And somehow, she already knew, with a terrifying certainty, something in this motel knew her name. She was no longer just the night clerk. She was a part of its story now. She took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes darting between the dark hallway and the buzzing monitor. The night was far from over, and the silence of the Crescent Motel was beginning to feel more like a threat than a comfort. She was alone, but she didn't feel like it. Not anymore. Renly just grunted, finally lifting his head to stare at her with small, pale eyes. HMPH. Just stay alert. Don't let anyone wander past the lobby without checking in. Sure, Cassie replied, trying to keep her tone professional. Jonah told me not to open room 23. Do you know why? Renly froze for a split second. Then he snorted. Jonah talks too much. Just do your job. And that was all he said. He gathered his papers and shuffled toward his office, leaving Cassie alone with more questions than answers. The night dragged on, painfully slow. Only two guests checked in, a couple who smelled like old cigarettes, and did UN stop arguing long enough to sign the register properly. Cassie tried to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting back to that room. Room 23. Why was it off limits? What was Jonah so afraid of? Maybe the lighting was just different. Maybe she was just tired and her memory was playing tricks on her. But as she watched, something else happened. Something that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The doorknob. The doorknob to room 23 twitched. Just once. A small, almost delicate movement, as if someone inside had just brushed their fingers against it. Cassie forced herself forward, one step at a time, until she was standing just a few feet away from room 23. The door loomed at the end of the hall like a wounded animal. That new scratch carving an ugly slash through the peeling paint. She raised her flashlight, aiming its bright beam at the door. Something glinted on the surface. She stepped closer, her curiosity overriding her fear for a brief moment. The bottom of the door had a narrow gap, barely half an inch of space separating the room from the hallway carpet. As she stared, transfixed, something slid under it. Something thin, something dark, a shadow. It unfurled across the carpet like a hand, its inky fingers reaching for her foot. Cassie screamed. A raw, guttural sound of pure terror. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, and nearly falling as she fled down the hall. She slammed her hand on the old rotary phone to call the manager's office. But before she could even dial the first number, a faint sound drifted down the hallway. A whisper, so soft, so careful, and so chillingly familiar. Cassie, her name. It came directly from the hallway, from the direction of room 23. But there was no one there. And no one in this motel should even know her name. Cassie stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, her heart pounding so hard it physically hurt. She knew one thing with absolute, terrifying certainty. Whatever was in room 23 wanted her attention, and it was no longer trying to hide. Cassie didn't move for nearly a full minute. Her hand hovered over the phone, knuckles white, fingers trembling as the last shred of the whisper faded into the silent hallway. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee out the front doors and never come back. Leave this motel, this town, leave everything behind. But her feet felt glued to the worn-out floor. Finally, with a series of shaky breaths, she forced herself to dial the manager's number. It rang twice before Renly answered, his voice rough with sleep and thick with irritation. This better be important. Cassie clutched the receiver tighter, the plastic groaning under the pressure. Room 23, something's in there. Something's moving. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Renly sighed. A heavy, annoyed sound that made Cassie's stomach clench. No. There's nothing in that room. I heard knocking, she insisted, her voice getting louder. Something slid under the stop, he snapped, his voice sharp and cutting. You're overtired. Jonah scared you with his stupid ghost stories. Go get some rest. No, you don't understand, she said, her voice rising with panic. There's Renly, hung up. Cassie stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like an angry insect. Her pulse pounded against her eardrums. She felt so small, so helpless, and furious. But underneath all of that, she was terrified. She hugged her arms tightly around herself and sank slowly into the squeaky desk chair, trying to steady her breathing. The motel felt too quiet, too still, as if the very walls were holding their breath, listening. She forced herself to glance at the grainy monitor for the hallway camera again. Room 23's door was closed, just as it had been before, but something had changed. A dark smear streaked across the carpet, right in front of the door. It was thin, long. It stretched out a few inches into the hallway, and then it just stopped. Cassie's stomach twisted into a cold knot. She felt watched. She felt chosen. She felt known. By 3 a.m., Cassie still couldn't settle down. The whispers had stopped, but her nerves were raw, stretched to their breaking point. Every creak in the old motel's walls made her flinch. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights above made her skin crawl. She needed a distraction, something to ground her. She reached for the old, beat-up motel binder again, flipping through the pages, looking for something. Anything. Maybe a clue. Maybe just validation that she wasn't losing her mind. When she reached the very back, she noticed a section she hadn't seen the night before. The tab was faded, but the words were just legible. Incident reports. Her hands shook as she opened it. Most of the pages were yellowed and smudged with age, the handwriting rushed and messy, as if written in a hurry. She skimmed the dates. Each report was older than the last, going back years. Then one short, stark entry caught her eye. It read, Room 23 guest complained of voices at 2:13 a.m. No one inside. No one checked in. Room sealed afterward. There was no signature, no explanation, no follow-up. Just those 3 vague lines, written 15 years ago. A deep, penetrating chill ran down her spine. 15 years ago. Why did that number feel so close? So familiar? It echoed in her mind with a strange, unsettling weight. She closed the binder with a soft thud. The digital clock on the desk read 2:03 a.m. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the time from the report. 10 minutes until the whisper always came. She didn't want to be in the hallway when it happened again. She really, really didn't. But she needed answers. She had to know if that dark smear was real. If she didn't confirm what she saw on the monitor, she'd drive herself completely insane, wondering. She found the heavy flashlight on the floor, where it had rolled after she dropped it in her panic. She brushed off the dust, flicked it on, and stepped back into the hallway. The light's beam quivered slightly as she walked, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She wasn't going to go near the door. Not again. She couldn't, but she could look, from a distance. Halfway down the hall, she stopped. Room 23 sat ahead of her, its door looming in the dim light. The fresh crack in the paint seemed to glisten, wet and raw, and the smear on the carpet. It was darker, up close, almost black. Was it dried? Or was it still damp? Curiosity warred with her fear. She crouched down, her heart hammering against her ribs, and carefully, cautiously, touched the substance with the back of her finger, wet. She jerked her hand away with a gasp, wiping it frantically on her jeans. That's when she heard it. A whisper, so faint at first, She thought it might be the wind rattling the old building. Then it became clearer. Then it was unmistakable. Cassie. The voice slid through the hallway like smoke, curling around her ears, circling her. It wasn't loud, but it was there. It was alive, and it was intentional. She stumbled back, her breath quickening into ragged gasps. No, 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 no. Then the whisper changed. It stretched, the sound becoming longer, deeper. And this time, it came from inside her left ear. Directly. As if someone, or something, stood inches behind her shoulder, breathing the words right into her. Cassie, open the door. Cassie screamed and spun around, swinging the heavy flashlight through empty air. Nothing was there. No one. The hallway was completely empty. But her ear still tingled with a strange sensation, cold and burning all at once. She ran. She didn't stop until she was back in the lobby, slamming the hallway door shut behind her, as if that could possibly make a difference. She pressed her back against the cool surface of the front counter, gasping for air, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. But the whisper followed her. It was inside her head now. It wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't desperate. It was just patient. Cassie. Her name, over and over again. Soft as breathing. As inevitable as the coming darkness. Cassie clamped her hands over her ears, pressing until it hurt. Tears of sheer terror streaming down her cheeks. But it didn't help. The voice whispered anyway. And in that moment, with the hallway door trembling lightly behind her, as if touched by a cold, unseen breeze, Cassie finally realized the truth she had been so desperately trying not to believe. The whisper didn't come from the hallway anymore. It didn't come from the vents or the old pipes. It came from the room. From behind that sealed door. It came from something that already knew her. Something that had been waiting. And it wanted her. Cassie stayed awake long after the sun rose. Even when she finally made it home, her ears still rang with that whisper, soft, curling, as if it lived somewhere deep beneath her skin. She scrubbed her face, her arms, the side of her neck where it felt like a cold breath had touched her, but it didn't help. It was a phantom feeling, a stain she couldn't wash away. Every room of her tiny apartment felt wrong. The shadows seemed too deep. The silence was too heavy, pressing down on her. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. The thought of closing her eyes and seeing that dark room, hearing that whisper again, was terrifying. When the time came to return to work, she tried calling out sick. She left message after message, but the string of unanswered phone calls from management earlier in the day told her one thing. She wasn't being given a choice. The Crescent Motel wanted her back. And she had a horrifying feeling that room 23 wasn't finished with her. When Cassie stepped into the lobby that night, the lights flickered again. But it wasn't random this time. It was a slow, deliberate pulse, almost like the building was breathing, in and out, in and out. The lobby was empty. Renly wasn't there. No Jonah, just an uneasy quiet that stretched across every corner of the room, clinging to the worn furniture and dusty floors. Cassie dropped her bag behind the counter and pulled out the binder, again the same one with the incident reports. Her fingers moved quickly now, driven by a desperate need for answers. She flipped through pages she had only skimmed before. There had to be more. Something she missed. Something that explained what was happening. She turned to the very first pages, back to the early years of the motel. The reports were mundane. Faulty locks. Odd noises in the pipes. Missing items from the laundry. Lights flickering off for minutes at a time. All minor things, easily explained away. Nothing supernatural. Nothing that pointed to the bone-chilling presence she felt. She kept flipping, the brittle paper crinkling under her fingers, until a thin sheet of yellowed paper slipped loose. It drifted down onto the counter like a dead leaf, silent and ancient. Cassie picked it up. It was a guest registration form. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate. The signature at the bottom made her heart freeze solid in her chest. Cassandra Hale. It was her name, her exact handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. No, this couldn't be right. The date on the form was smeared, but she could just make out the year. 15 years ago. The year I was born, she whispered, the words barely audible in the silent lobby. Her hands shook as she turned the page over. On the back, in a different, hurried script, someone had written one sentence. Room 23, requested by guest. Cassie stared at it until her eyes stung with unshed tears. She'd never been here before. Her family had never even heard of this god-forsaken motel. Why would anyone register her name, her full name, a very day she was born? It made no sense. She flipped back to the binder, searching frantically, her pulse thundering in her ears. The pages blurred in front of her eyes until a single, bold heading stopped her completely. Missing guest report, room 23. Her breath hitched. The entry was short, clinical, just like the others. Guest checked in under false name. Claimed to have a newborn with them. No infant found. Room discovered empty the next morning. Door sealed permanently. Cassie's spine tingled with an icy dread. Her vision blurred. A newborn, 15 years ago. Her name written on the guest book. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who brought me here?" The room felt suddenly smaller. The walls closing in, the air growing colder, stealing the warmth from her skin. She clutched the counter to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. That's when she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate tapping. It wasn't from the hallway this time. It was coming from the storage closet right behind her. Cassie turned, swallowing hard against the lump of fear in her throat. The door was slightly ajar. Just an inch, maybe less. A sliver of pure darkness. She edged toward it, each footstep sounding like a drumbeat in her own ears. Her hand trembled as she reached out and pushed the door wider. The closet was dark, cold. The smell of dust and old mildew stung her nose. Old yellowed linens were stacked against the walls, and above them, lining the shelves, hung the motel's forgotten guest books. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching back into the shadows. She raised her phone, the flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the gloom. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Cassie stepped inside, nudging aside a stack of dusty boxes. The guest books looked ancient. Some were leather-bound and cracked with age. Others swollen and warped from moisture. She pulled down an old one, marked Year 1, in flaking gold ink. She wasn't sure why. She wasn't sure how she even knew to look. But something inside her, a quiet, insistent voice, whispered, "You need to see." She opened the book. Names filled the pages in careful, looping cursive. Nothing strange, nothing unusual. She flipped through, page after page of forgotten travelers. Then she reached the very last page, and her world fell apart. Her name, Cassandra Hale, written in the same faded ink, decades before she was ever born. Cassie choked on a scream, her fingers going numb. She dropped the book. It hit the floor with a soft, dull thud and fell open not to her name, but to a fresh, blank page at the very end. As she stared, frozen in horror, something appeared on it, slowly, deliberately, as if written by an invisible hand pressing into the very fibers of the paper. Letter by letter, a single message bloomed from the empty page. "Welcome back, Cassie." She stumbled backward, slamming hard into the shelf behind her. The lights in the closet flickered violently. The door, which she had left wide open, creaked shut on its own. And then a whisper breathed directly into her left ear, colder than ice, intimate and possessive. "You came back to me once. You'll come back again." Cassie bolted from the closet, pure adrenaline surging through her. Heart pounding wildly, tears burning her eyes. She didn't stop running. The storage door slammed shut behind her with a deafening, final bang. When she reached the lobby, gasping for breath, she grabbed the front counter for support, her legs about to give out. That's when something glinted on the security monitor. She froze, her eyes locking onto the screen. Room 23's camera feed. The door was no longer just cracked. It was open, a thin slice. Barely an inch wide. Just enough for someone or something to look out. And on the floor, in the hallway right in front of it, lay a small, folded piece of paper. It looked like it had been placed there, deliberately, purposefully, waiting for her. Cassie's knees weakened. Her mind raced, trying to connect the impossible dots. Her past, her name, this motel room, 23. It was all connected. A tangled web woven long before she was born. And whatever lived behind that door, it had been waiting for her, since the very day she was born. Cassie didn't dare move. Her eyes were glued to the hallway camera, to the sliver of darkness leaking from behind room 23's barely open door. The folded paper, lying at its threshold, looked so ordinary, like a receipt, or a note passed between kids. But the way it sat there, perfectly centered, perfectly placed, perfectly waiting. Her breath shuddered. No, no, I'm not going down there again. She backed away from the monitor, as if the door on the screen could somehow reach her through the glass. Just then, the lobby door swung open. Cassie gasped, nearly screaming before realizing it was only Renly storming in, his coat half-buttoned and a scowl on his face. He froze when he saw her expression. "What happened?" he demanded. Cassie pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. "The door, room 23, it's open, and there's something on the floor. Something left for me." Renly's jaw tightened. He walked straight to the monitor, his steps quick and controlled, too controlled. His eyes scanned the screen, and for the first time since she'd met him, Cassie saw something crack inside him. Not annoyance, not impatience, fear, real fear. It flickered across his face, therefore only a second before he swallowed it down. "It's nothing," he said too sharply. Cassie just stared at him. "You're lying." Renly didn't answer. Instead, he reached behind the counter and pulled out an old brass key on a chain, one Cassie had never seen before. He held it so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Fixing this," Renly muttered. "Before it goes too far." He headed for the hallway door. Cassie grabbed his sleeve. "Stop. Don't open it." Renly turned to her with an expression caught between regret and pity. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." He shook his head slowly. "Cassie, you don't understand the kind of place this is." "Then tell me," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Because something in there knows my name. It knows my handwriting. And it's leaving messages for me." Renly's gaze flicked to the monitor again. He swallowed. "They always know the name of the one they choose." Cassie's blood ran cold. "The one they choose," she whispered. "What does that mean?" Renly hesitated, and for the first time, he spoke without any of his usual irritation. "The motel isn't haunted, Cassie. It's hungry." Her breath caught in her throat. "Room 23. It pulls people in," Renly continued. "It always has. Since long before I worked here. Longer than anyone alive remembers. Most rooms are just rooms. But that one wants things. And once it marked someone, he looked directly at her. It doesn't stop. Cassie felt the room tilt. Why me? She whispered. Why my name, my birthday? Renly looked exhausted, suddenly older than he had just minutes before. It doesn't choose randomly. It never has. He paused, then said something that made Cassie's heart drop into her stomach. You were the last name written in that room before it was sealed. Cassie stared blankly. But I wasn't, I've never. You were just a baby, Renly said quietly. No older than a day. Her vision blurred. I was. Here, she whispered. Renly nodded. The guest who checked in with you never checked out. The room was empty the next morning, except for a signature and blood under the bed frame. No infant, no body, nothing. He rubbed his eyes with a shaking hand. We sealed the room. But sealing a hungry thing doesn't starve it. It just waits. It remembers. Cassie felt her entire body tremble. Her voice came out barely audible. And now it wants me back. Renly looked away. You weren't supposed to work here, he muttered. Jonah wasn't supposed to quit. No one your age was ever supposed to take this job. It was. He stopped himself. A mistake, he finished. Cassie felt tears burn her eyes. You hired me, she whispered. You sent me right to it. Renly's silence answered everything. He stepped toward the hallway. Cassie grabbed his arm again, desperately. Don't go down there alone. Renly didn't turn around this time. I have to, he said. If I don't close that door now, it won't stay like that. It will open more. And then a loud knock echoed from the far end of the hallway. One single, heavy pound. Renly froze. Cassie's breath stopped. The knock came again. Not on the hallway door, not on a wall, but unmistakably. On the inside of room 23. Renly whispered, it shouldn't be able to do that. The flashlight on the counter flickered. The monitor glitched on the camera. The door opened another inch. Cassie's heart slammed in her chest. Renly, she pleaded. Don't. He stepped into the hallway. Stay here, he ordered. No matter what you hear. Do not follow me. The hallway door swung shut behind him. Cassie stood frozen in the lobby, staring at the monitor, her pulse roaring in her ears. Renly walked slowly down the hall, to wardroom 23, his shadow long and trembling under the flickering lights. He bent down, reached for the folded paper, and picked it up. Cassie leaned closer to the screen. Renly unfolded it. His face drained of all color. He turned toward the camera, eyes wide, and whispered something Cassie could not hear, before she could react. Room 23's door snapped open, and Renly vanished inside. The door slammed shut. The lights went out. The screen went black. Cassie collapsed to her knees, screaming Renly's name. But there was no answer. Only a whisper, right behind her. Cassie. The key. Cassie spun around so fast she nearly fell. The lobby was empty. Silent, still, but the whisper still lingered in the air, faint, cold, brushing past her ear like invisible fingers. She backed into the counter, chest heaving, her eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for the source of the sound. Renly, she called, even though she knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be. No response. Just the soft, anxious buzz of the emergency lights that flickered back on, weak and trembling. The main power was still out. Cassie stumbled toward the hallway door and grabbed the handle, her heart hammering against her ribs. Locked. She pulled harder, rattling it in its frame. It didn't budge. Something had sealed it shut from the other side. Let me in, she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Renly. The hallway camera, mounted high in the corner, flickered back to life. The small monitor on the desk behind her lit up, showing the dim, empty corridor. But it wasn't empty. For a split second, Cassie saw something she wished she hadn't. A shadow tall, distorted, impossibly long standing in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't moving. It was just watching. Waiting. She backed away from the screen, her pulse thundering in her ears, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Please don't be real. Please, please don't be real. Then, a clink. A small, metallic sound from behind her. Cassie turned slowly, every muscle in her body tensed. On the counter, where her bag had been just moments earlier, something new sat, something that hadn't been there before. The old brass key, Renly's key. The one to room 23. Except now, it wasn't cold and dull. It pulsed. A faint red glow flickered within the aged metal, like a tiny, trapped heartbeat. Cassie stared at it, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. How did you sit? She whispered into the empty lobby. No one answered, but as if in response, the emergency lights dimmed, and the key glowed brighter, illuminating the counter with a deep, sickening warmth. A feeling crept through her bones, not a thought, not a voice, but a pull. An undeniable, ancient command. Come here, come back, open the door. Her hands, resting at her sides, twitched. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, I'm not going anywhere near that thing. But her feet stepped closer anyway, one involuntary step after another. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and snatched her hand back, just as it brushed the air above the key, as if she'd touched fire. Stop it. Her voice trembled, a choked sob caught in her throat. The key did not stop. It called to her. Not with words, with knowing, with a promise of something terrible and final. Cassie spun around and grabbed the old rotary phone from the counter, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial. 911. The line rang once, twice. Then, the ringing cut off abruptly. A hiss of static filled her ear, loud and grating, and then a voice. A whisper, Cassie. Her entire body locked in place. She dropped the phone, letting it swing by its twisted cord, the whisper fading into a soft crackle against the plastic. Her eyes drifted back to the key. It had moved. It now sat on the very edge of the counter, hanging halfway off the surface, as if offering itself to her. No, she breathed, taking a step back. No, no, no. But the hallway door behind her shuddered. Once, twice. A heavy, dragging sound brushed against the other side. Cassie backed up until her legs hit the counter, tears finally spilling from her eyes, hot against her cold skin. The key, perched precariously on the edge, toppled, but it didn't fall. It hung suspended in mid-air, for a moment, just a moment, as if held by an invisible hand. Then, with a gentle, deliberate motion, it dropped right into Cassie's open waiting palm. Her breath stopped. The metal burned cold against her skin, colder than ice, colder than the voice that had whispered her name. She tried to throw it. Her arm wouldn't move. She tried to let it fall, to open her fingers. They would not obey. It was as if the key had grown roots, burrowing deep into her hand, becoming a part of her. No, no. She slammed her hand against the wooden counter, trying to shake the key loose, to break its hold, but the moment her skin hit the wood, the lobby lights snapped off. The room was plunged into complete, suffocating darkness. Cassie froze, her ears straining. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat. Then a sound. Click. Not from her hand. From the hallway. From room 23. The door, unlocking. Through the oppressive darkness, a single emergency light sputtered back on, casting a weak, sickly glow directly above the hallway door. Cassie stared, her breathing fast and shallow. The door she had watched on the camera, the one that had swallowed Renly whole, was no longer shut. It stood wide open. Inside was only pitch blackness. A void, waiting. Her hand, the one holding the key, lifted on its own, palm up, presenting the key to the darkness. No, please, stop. But her body was not her own. The key dragged her forward like a leash, pulling her toward the open doorway. She took one step, then another. The weak emergency light flickered behind her and died completely, leaving her in the hallway's grip. The motel was silent except for her own shaky breathing. And the whisper, right beside her ear, intimate and cold. "Bring it back to me." Cassie screamed. A raw, desperate sound, swallowed by the silence. She pulled against the invisible force, dragging her toward room 23. Her nails scraped uselessly against the wallpaper. Her shoes slid on the worn carpet. Her lungs burned for air she couldn't seem to find. But the pull was stronger than she was. So much stronger. The darkness inside room 23 pulsed, like a living, breathing heartbeat. The whisper grew deeper, hungrier, wrapping around her. "Come home, Cassie." Her hand reached forward, extending into the black maw of the room. The key in her palm flared, its light turning from a faint pulse to a brilliant, blood-red beacon. And as she crossed the threshold of the open door, as her foot touched the floor of room 23, something inside reached out to welcome her. Cassie held the cold key tightly in her palm, trying to figure out why it felt so profoundly wrong. It wasn't just its age. The iron was pitted and worn, sure, but it felt like it belonged to another time, another place entirely, somewhere darker. The fluorescent lights in the long, empty hallway above her buzzed, with a low, constant hum, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. She was supposed to be locking up for the night, a simple, routine task she'd done 100 times before. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had this key. She'd found it just sitting on the front desk, no note, no explanation. Just a heavy, ornate, black iron key. And then it came again. "Cassie." The whisper was so faint, it was like a wisp of smoke curling around her ears. It seemed to come from right behind her. She spun around, her flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the air. But the hallway was completely empty. The beam danced over peeling paint and the scuffed linoleum floor. No footsteps receded into the distance. No shadows darted out of sight. There was nothing. Just the endless, sterile corridor and the incessant buzzing of the lights. A shiver traced its way down her spine, cold and unwelcome. It had to be her imagination. Stress, maybe. The building was old and made strange noises all the time. She tried to convince herself, her own logic a thin shield against a rising tide of dread. She took a slow, deliberate step back, trying to ground herself, to shake off the unnerving feeling. And then she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. At the far end of the corridor, where there had only ever been a solid, blank wall, now stood a door. A door that had absolutely, unequivocally, never been there before. Her mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of it. She walked this hallway every single night. She knew every crack in the plaster, every stain on the floor. There was no door there. There couldn't be. But it stood there now, a stark, impossible fact. It didn't match the rest of the building in any way. The surrounding walls were painted a bland, institutional beige, but this door was made of a dark, splintered wood, so black it seemed to swallow the light. The frame was crooked, jagged, as if it had been violently ripped from another structure and crudely forced into the wall right here. It looked ancient, brutal, and scratched crudely across its surface, carved deep into the wood by what looked like fingernails, was a single word: return. A knot of pure ice formed in Cassie's stomach. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run out the main entrance and not stop until she was home with the lights on and the doors locked. But her feet wouldn't obey. An invisible force seemed to take hold, pulling her forward, one reluctant step at a time. It was like wading through thick water, a strange, magnetic pull drawing her closer and closer to the impossible door. The air grew perceptibly colder with each step she took. The warmth of the building leached away, replaced by a damp, cellar-like chill. Her breath began to mist in front of her face, little white puffs in the cold air. She was standing right in front of it now, close enough to touch the rough, scarred wood. The cold radiating from it was intense, seeping into her bones. Without conscious thought, almost as if her arm belonged to someone else, she raised the hand holding the strange key. The intricate, dark iron key she'd found on the desk. Her hand moved toward the keyhole, a black slit in a tarnished brass lock plate. The key slid into the lock with an unnerving smoothness, a perfect, seamless fit. And then click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and loud in the dead silence. The key had turned all by itself. Her fingers hadn't moved, but the lock had disengaged. Slowly, with a low, drawn-out groan of ancient hinges, the door began to creak open, just a few inches. Cassie peered into the gap, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Inside, there was no room, no furniture, no light. There was only darkness. A swirling, churning blackness, thick and viscous, like smoke or ink suspended in water. It moved with a life of its own, and something moved within it. A shape, tall and impossibly thin, shifted in the roiling dark. It was a fleeting impression, a silhouette against the deeper black, but it was unmistakably there. Cassie stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Her trance was broken, shattered by pure, unadulterated terror. As she backed away, a voice slithered out from the darkness behind the door. It was low, raspy, and ancient, a sound like gravel and dust. "You found the key. Now come back to us." The words hit her like a physical blow. The whisper from the hallway, the impossible door, the key was all connected. This wasn't a random occurrence. It was a summons. They were waiting for her. Her fear exploded into a supernova of panic. With a raw cry, Cassie threw her entire weight against the door, shoving it shut with all her might. It closed with a heavy, final thud. The lock clicked again, this time with a sound of grim finality. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't wait to see if it would open again. She just ran. Her footsteps slapped against the linoleum, the sound echoing frantically through the long, empty hallway, a frantic drumbeat of her terror. She didn't dare look behind her. She could feel the coldness at her back, the silent, watching presence of that impossible door. She burst through the main doors into the night air, gasping, her lungs burning. The key was gone. She didn't know if she'd dropped it, or if it had simply vanished from her hand. It didn't matter. She ran and ran, the single word scratched into the door burning itself into her mind. Return. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than any cold, that sooner or later, she would have to. Cassie didn't stop running. Not until she reached the break room, her lungs burning, her mind screaming. She slammed the door shut behind her, the heavy thud echoing in the sudden silence. Pressing her back against the cool wood, she slid down, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room felt ... normal. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the mismatched tables and chairs. Vending machines stood sentinel against one wall, their colorful packages a beacon of mundane reality. The stale, comforting smell of old coffee hung in the air. These were normal things, safe things. But the tremor in her hands told a different story. They wouldn't stop shaking, a frantic dance she couldn't control. She fumbled for her phone, her lifeline. She had to call someone, anyone. Her fingers smeared across the screen as she pulled it from her pocket. But it was black, lifeless. Right, of course. The battery had died hours ago. She remembered the low battery warning, remembered ignoring it. A fresh wave of despair washed over her. Just then, the dead phone buzzed in her palm. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration that jolted through her entire arm. Cassie froze, her eyes locked on the dark rectangle. The screen flickered to life, not the usual boot-up sequence, but a glitchy, stuttering light. Like it was fighting against something unseen, struggling to display an image. Then, a notification banner sliced across the top of the screen. Unknown number. Her blood ran cold. The message was short, but it hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Why did you open it?" Her chest tightened, a vice-like grip squeezing the air from her lungs. She didn't recognize the number. She didn't want to. Before she could even process the first message, a second one appeared right below it. Unknown number. We were waiting. The words seemed to writhe on the screen. Waiting. Who was we? Cassie's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob as the phone clattered from her trembling grasp onto a nearby table. The lights in the break room flickered once, plunging her into a half-second of darkness before humming back to life, brighter than before. The sudden shift was jarring, unnatural. She backed away from the table, her eyes still glued to the phone. It was a trap, a lure. She knew it. But then it buzzed again, this time harder, skittering across the smooth surface of the table like a trapped insect. Against every instinct, screaming at her to run, to leave it, to get out of the building, she found herself creeping back towards it. Her own curiosity was a betrayer, a hook she couldn't shake loose. With a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, she picked it up. The screen changed instantly. The message thread was gone. In its place, a video played, grainy and dark. It was a shaky, handheld recording of a room steeped in absolute blackness. But it wasn't just empty darkness. It was a swirling, churning void, the exact same chaotic abyss she had glimpsed behind that mysterious, forbidden door. The camera, the point of view, began to move forward, as if the person holding it was walking deeper and deeper into the suffocating gloom. Cassie's breathing turned shallow, each inhale a sharp, painful rasp. She couldn't look away. The recording suddenly tilted upward, pointing toward something in the swirling dark. And then she saw it. Her own face, reflected in the glossy surface of the darkness. Her eyes were wide with a primal terror she recognized all too well. It was her, right now, but also, not. It was as if she had been there before, in that place, and this was the evidence. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of the impossible. And then, behind her reflection, something else moved. A shape coalesced from the shadows. Tall, impossibly thin. Long, spindly arms unfolded from its sides, reaching, grasping. It had no discernible features, no eyes, no nose, but she could feel it, she could see it. A smile. A wide, lipless smile stretched across a featureless face. The video cut to black. The phone screen went dark. Cassie staggered back, a choked gasp escaping her lips. She almost dropped the phone again, her fingers numb and clumsy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, oppressive silence of the room. The lights flickered once more, a final, taunting wink. And then the phone vibrated a final time. A new message, stark and white, against the black screen. Unknown number, we see you. A crawl of pure ice traced its way up her spine. The words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact. She wasn't alone in the building. She wasn't even alone in the room. And whatever she had let out from behind that door, whatever had been waiting, it wasn't finished with her. Not by a long shot. The mark. Cassie backed away from her phone until her legs hit the cold metal of the cabinet behind her. A single, chilling message glowed on the screen, sent from an unknown number. I see you. Her breath hitched. She was supposed to be the only one in the building. Her late-night shift was always a solitary affair, a chance to catch up on paperwork in the blessed quiet. But tonight, that quiet felt different. It felt heavy, suffocating. She needed to get out, now. She fumbled for her bag, her fingers clumsy with a sudden, primal fear. Slinging it over her shoulder, she rushed out of the break room, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud through the empty halls. Each step seemed to bounce off the walls and come right back at her, a frantic drumbeat counting down to something. Everything felt wrong. The air was thick, charged with an energy she couldn't name. The building was too quiet, too still. It was the kind of silence you feel in your bones, like the entire structure was holding its breath, waiting. The usual hum of the ventilation system was gone. The soft glow of the emergency lights seemed dimmer, casting long, distorted shadows that danced in the corners of her vision. Every door she passed felt like a closed eye, watching her desperate flight. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She was a rational person. She didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. There had to be a logical explanation. A prank, a security guard playing a sick joke. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was so intense it was almost a physical pressure against her skin. She finally reached the main lobby. The vast open space that usually felt so welcoming during the day now looked like a cavernous maw. Moonlight streamed through the tall glass windows, painting silvery stripes on the polished floor, but it offered no comfort. She lunged for the heavy glass front doors, shoving with all her might. They didn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She tried again, putting her shoulder into it. They were unlocked. She felt the latch give way, but it was like pushing against a solid wall. Something on the other side was keeping them closed. Something impossibly strong. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She rattled the handles, her palms slick with sweat. Locked in. The thought screamed through her mind. Behind her, a sound broke the silence. A soft tap on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, measured. The sound of footsteps, but not quite. They were too light, too even. A chilling rhythm that seemed to mock the frantic beating of her own heart. Every instinct told her not to, but she had to look. Slowly, her body stiff with terror, Cassie turned. At the far end of the lobby, shrouded in the deepest shadows, where the moonlight couldn't reach, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly so, its form a distorted silhouette against the gloom. It wasn't a person, it couldn't be. The outline flickered and wavered, like bad static on an old television screen, its edges blurring and reforming. It didn't walk like a human. Its movements were unnervingly smooth, a slow, gliding motion that made it seem as if it were floating just above the floor. As if the laws of gravity were merely a suggestion it chose to ignore. As it drifted closer, she could make out more details, or rather, the horrifying lack of them. There was no face, no eyes, no mouth, just a blank, shifting expanse of shadow. It was a void in the shape of a man, a tear in the fabric of reality. Cassie's body was frozen, locked in a paralysis of pure, undiluted terror. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, but her limbs refused to obey. The tapping sound continued, the source now clear. One of its long, unnaturally thin arms was extended, and the tip of a single finger was dragging along the polished floor, leaving a faint, shimmering trail in its wake. Tap, 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 closer. A surge of adrenaline finally broke the spell. Her survival instinct kicked in, raw and powerful. Her eyes darted around the lobby, searching for a weapon, an escape. Her gaze landed on a heavy, metal-framed chair near the reception desk. Without a second thought, she grabbed it. The chair felt both heavy and weightless in her hands. With a desperate cry that was more air than sound, she swung it with all her strength at the glass door. Crash. The sound was deafening, an explosion of shattering glass that momentarily drowned out the tapping. The door imploded, sending a shower of sharp, crystalline fragments everywhere. A rush of cold night air flooded the lobby, a blessed, shocking slap to her senses. It smelled of rain and freedom. Cassie didn't hesitate. She didn't even register the sharp sting as shards of glass cut her arms and legs. She dove through the jagged opening, landing hard on the concrete pavement outside. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she ignored the pain. She scrambled to her feet, her sneakers slipping on the slick ground, and then she ran. She ran without looking back, her lungs burning, her legs pumping on pure fear. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing truck, were the most beautiful things she had ever heard. She didn't slow down, didn't dare to, until she was blocks away, collapsing under the bright, reassuring glow of a streetlight. She bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. She was safe, she was out. The adrenaline began to fade, and in its place, a sharp, burning pain shot through her left wrist. She gasped and looked down. Her sleeve was torn, and on her skin, a symbol glowed with a faint, angry red light. It looked like a curved spiral with sharp, intersecting lines, almost like a stylized claw mark. It wasn't a cut or a scratch. It looked as if it had been burned there from the inside out, the light pulsing in time with her frantic heartbeat. She stared at it in horror, her mind reeling. What was this? She tried to rub it, but the skin was smooth, unbroken. The mark was under her skin, a part of her. Then, as she watched, the glowing slowly faded. The red lines seemed to retreat, sinking deeper into her flesh until they vanished completely. The mark was gone, but the burning didn't stop. It was a deep, internal ache, a phantom heat that lingered long after the light had disappeared. Cassie knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that it wasn't really gone. It was just hidden. Whatever that thing was inside the building, it had touched her, it had claimed her, it had marked her. She hugged her wrist to her chest, a shudder racking her body. Her gaze was drawn back in the direction she had come. From this distance, the office building was just another dark monolith against the night sky. But she could see the shattered doorway, a black, gaping wound in its side. And for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something standing there. Cassie didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Not after what happened. Not after that door. Every shadow on the street seemed to stretch toward her. Every passing car felt like it was hiding something sinister behind its wheels. She needed light. She needed people. She needed safety. Or at least the illusion of it. After walking for what felt like an eternity, she spotted it. A 24-hour diner, its neon sign flickering and buzzing softly in the late-night air. It promised warmth, coffee, and a slice of normalcy she desperately craved. She pushed the door open, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Inside, there was life. The low hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes, the rich, comforting smell of brewing coffee. It felt safe, or safe enough. She slid into a worn vinyl booth near the window, her hands shaking so badly she could barely lift the glass of water the waitress brought her. She tried to calm herself, watching the sparse late-night traffic pass by outside. Then the lights flickered. But it wasn't the normal, tired flicker of an old diner. It was a sudden, unnatural darkening. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The quiet conversations stopped. The clatter of cutlery ceased. A cold dread crept up Cassie's spine. Her hand went instinctively to her pocket. The key. She hadn't even realized it was still there. As her fingers brushed against it, a strange vibration pulsed through the metal, a low, rhythmic hum. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling. The key no longer looked old and rusty. It gleamed, polished, and silver, as if it were brand new, almost alive. Wrapped tightly around its shaft was a small slip of paper, one that definitely hadn't been there before. With a growing sense of panic, she unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, like scratches on a wall. It read, "The door follows you. Return before we come out." Cassie's stomach churned. The words swam before her eyes. Return. Return to that place. The paper slipped from her nerveless fingers and drifted to the floor. She looked up, her gaze snapping across the diner, and that's when she saw her. A figure was rising from the booth directly across from hers. A woman, or something that looked like a woman. Her eyes, they were completely black. No whites, no irises. Just two pools of endless, vacant darkness. A slow, knowing smile stretched her lips, a smile that promised nothing but terror. Cassie's breath caught in her throat. Her scream was a silent one, trapped behind her frozen lips. Before she could even think to move, to run, the diner's lights went out entirely, plunging her into total, absolute darkness. Panic seized her. She scrambled to get out of the booth, her hands flailing in the void. A cold, firm hand grabbed her shoulder, its grip like iron. A voice, dry and rasping, hissed directly in her ear. A whisper that felt like it was slithering inside her head. "Time to come back." Cassie screamed. A raw, piercing sound that was swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The diner, once a beacon of safety, now felt endless. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were stretching across the walls, across the floor, creeping over every surface, reaching for her. And somewhere, deep down, in the pit of her soul, she knew she couldn't run forever. Somewhere, the door waited, and it always would. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves a good scare. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you in the shadows.